All right. Oh, Pete, you want to pop up the PowerPoint?
Yep.
All right. Thanks everybody for coming. So this is organizing campaigns. Sometimes we call them issue campaigns. Part 1 or part 2. I'm sorry, this is part 2. Part 1 was held on February 7th. It's okay if you didn't attend. Hopefully you got a chance to review the video. I sent a video out earlier last week for people who didn't attend, but that's okay. Even if you didn't attend or didn't see the video, no problem. Feel free to ask questions along the way if you have any questions about what we're talking about. No problem. So we'll go over some Zoom standards before we get started. Slide. So this says keep yourself muted, but I just want to say, please feel free to unmute at any point and speak up. We want this to be an engaging training. We want this to be more of a discussion than a formal training. So feel free at any point to speak up. Any questions you have, comments, personal experiences, we want to hear from you. So there's no bad comments. Feel free to speak up at any point. We'll try to keep an eye on the chat, but I think we both would prefer verbal comments rather than chat, but we'll try to keep an eye on that. As far as the video goes, we do, like this says, want to see your face, but we also understand that it gets exhausting going from virtual meeting to virtual meeting. There's going to be some times where we pull the PowerPoint down and just have an open discussion. It might be cool to have cameras on at that point, but again, it's totally up to you. All right, slide. So I'm just going to provide a quick recap of what we talked about last time. So there were 3 main areas of discussion. We spent some time defining what a campaign is and talking about why we do them. We define a campaign as an organized and strategic set of steps and actions meant to accomplish a defined goal. And we do this by creating a plan that uses our power, the power that we have to leverage change. And that comes from collective action, the collective pressure that we have as a union. And then secondly, we talked about the kinds of things that make up a good issue in order to build a campaign around. Does anybody remember the 4 factors we named when naming an issue to build a campaign around? Okay, widely felt, we talked about, oh yeah, go ahead, Christine.
I found my notebook.
Oh,
And I think in my scribble, it says widely felt or deeply felt, or wait, I have to read this, winnable or builds power for the union.
Yes, perfect. All 4 of those. Thanks, Christine. So widely felt, meaning does it impact a lot of people or enough people? Deeply felt, meaning is it important enough for people to actually care about it to the point where they'll actually be engaged and step up? Is it winnable? Doesn't mean that it's easy, but it means that we do have the power to win it eventually. And then build union power. Does it build our union? Does it make our union stronger in the end? And then lastly, we talked about building a team around an issue campaign and some strategies to do that. And the main strategy we talked about is small group discussions. And throughout all of that, we heard the example from the Department of Revenue. There was a telework campaign going on at the Department of Revenue, which is still going on. But unfortunately, Christine and Ann could not be with us today. So we won't be hearing much about that, but we will be a little bit, and we do have other examples to share. So we will definitely be sharing examples. Any questions about part 1? All right, it's off to you, Pete.
Cool. Thanks, Nick. So today, as Nick said, we're going to be focusing on kind of the second half of this, which is making a game plan for your campaign. So we want to actually start out by, it's Monday, and try to use our brains a little bit. I know everybody's been creaking forward, at least I have. So we're going to break into pairs here. And what I want to do is have people just discuss what are some things to consider when making a plan. So if you're making a plan for for a campaign, what are some of the things you consider? What are some things you do? Hi, everybody. So hopefully you didn't feel too cut off. I realized I didn't tell you how long I was going to give you. Sorry, Monday omissions. So I just want to popcorn. So the question for Nancy just joined us. But the question was, if you're starting an organizing campaign, what are some things to think about when making a plan? Like if you just brainstorm or just off the top of your head. So what do people come up with? Anything come to mind?
Well, assessment. I'll throw ideas. We talked about sort of specifics or qualities of the plan, needing to be specific and concrete, needing to be realistic, needing to be flexible and responsive to feedback, being data-driven, and being sustainable.
Those are all great. Concrete, specific, data-driven, realistic, sustainable. That's a good one. You mean like running it to if you're going to run a campaign, it needs to be doable by real people and actually not give up.
You don't want to stall midstream. That would be rather demoralizing for everybody.
Right. Totally. What about other folks? Anything to add?
Christine, Kelly and I talked, we only got so far in this conversation, but we talked about the first step, which is once you think you have a topic, listening a lot to what members' pain is and trying to hear from them what the solution is. And then we were a little unsure about what you do with that information. We just started to get into that. So
great.
Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Christine. Tim, I feel like you're about to say something.
Oh yeah, just what David was saying, the data, having data, good data is very nice leverage. Especially we just experienced that in our meet and confer committee at MDH.
Yeah.
And then I'd say, in our discussion, Haley and I were talking about that. I was sharing that example of the survey we did on, COVID experience. And Haley asked about the connection with MAPE on it. And I think that's important too, to be in good, regular communication with MAPE on campaigns. Key element.
When you say MAPE, who do you mean? Because I love to be the one to remind you that you, of course, are MAPE. All of you are. So, what do you mean? Do you mean with like local leaders, or statewide leaders, or staff, or who do you mean?
Like the MAPE Central, MAPE. Like you.
Got it. Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Anybody else? Thanks, Tim. Anybody else? Popcorn. Anyone else got a thing that hasn't been mentioned yet? Okay, cool.
Actually, I want to throw in just a little bit more that Jennifer, this data-driven aspect. These listening sessions, right? Eliciting common themes. If it's isolated grievances, that's not likely to get legs.
Yeah.
And the common themes, having the specific examples and situations that support those themes. So again, the data.
Right. That's great. That's right. Cool. So I'm going to share my screen again here. So those are all really good pieces. And I think you named a bunch of the things that are incorporated here. So we break them into 3 buckets. And I think you could cut them in different ways, like you guys talked about too. You guys are totally on the right track. So this is the way we sometimes think about it though. What do you want? Meaning, what is your demand? What is your solution? Sometimes we call it the ask. It depends how militant we're being, right? But it's really getting specific about what you want, about what the solution is to the problem that you're hearing people experience. I think Christine named that, which is that comes from listening. We're going to talk more about that. But that's imperative, because if you don't, so we'll talk about each one of them. And then second one is who can get it for you, meaning the target of your action is the person that can get you what you need. And then what do you need to do? That's the strategy and the tactics. Tactics make up a collection of tactics, make up your strategy of how to get that, about how to get that that thing from the target.
Over to me, Pete.
Yep.
All right. So you've got your solution. You've got your, you don't have your solution yet. Sorry. You've got your issue. You've got your team. You're starting to build your plan. And now you need to unite your team around the solution or the demand, or like Pete said, sometimes we call it an ask. And this may not be as easy as it sounds, but I want to spend some time there on reaching a consensus with your team on what the solution looks like. So why is that important? I'd like to hear from you all just quickly. Why is it important to reach a consensus with your team on what the solution is?
Well, it gives a sense of ownership to everybody. And if it's unified, it decreases the likelihood of getting at cross purposes.
Yep, absolutely. That sense of ownership, that buy-in, those folks are going to be more likely to participate and be energized and engaged throughout it if they have that ownership that David talked about. Absolutely. Any others? Oh, I get it. There's a so it's a focused effort working on agreed focus. Yep. Absolutely. So everybody's moving in the same direction. There's a common purpose and a common goal. And then also it's really important because you want a united front when you're dealing with management. We don't want management to be able to divide us over what a win looks like offering up a weak solution or a half measure. And I'll get back to I'll provide an example of what a half measure or a weak solution looks like in just a second. But now I want to go into these elements that make up a good solution or demand. This is kind of what we use to judge it. As David mentioned earlier, from the breakout, David mentioned concrete and specific. So on concrete, yeah, you'll definitely want it to be concrete. Like basically what this is saying is, will the things that we're asking for actually provide meaningful change? Or will we be right back here when the noise dies down in like a couple months? A good example of this is the student loan campaign, which happened in several different agencies. There was a lot of energy a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, where we were fighting for them in supplemental bargaining. And we weren't able to get it in supplemental bargaining, but we were able to get it in the main contract, but it was very discretionary. We have language in the contract that states that agencies, if they want to, may adopt a student loan debt relief program. And if they do, they have complete discretion on who gets it. So it's double discretionary. So the agency gets to decide whether or not they want to adopt it. And if they do adopt it, they get to decide who gets it. So that's not a really concrete win. So there was a lot of discussion around the student loan campaign at the time about whether or not that was a win. I think most people thought it wasn't. It was a step in the right direction. It was a foot in the door. But I just wanted to provide that as an example of a win that's not concrete solution, because it gives management way too much discretion. Specific, we don't want to leave anything up for interpretation, or management will likely exploit it. We see this in meet and confer tables all the time. When we bring an issue that doesn't have a specific solution attached to it, management will likely just figure out their own solution, and that normally means more discretion for them and less rights for the employees. Can anyone think of an example of a good demand that would fall apart if it wasn't specific enough?
This is Christine. Maybe where a change is required management needs to give adequate notice for something, a change in the employee's working conditions. So adequate notice. Yep. I mean, what is that really?
Absolutely. Yep. Adequate notice for us is going to mean a lot different. It's going to be a lot more of a time period to lead up to get that notice than it is for management. Management thinks adequate. They're probably going to think it's like 30 seconds. So yeah, absolutely. That's a good example. Another example we came up with was saying that we want a fair and equitable workplace, right? That's a good demand. Nobody would say that's not. We would go to management, and management would likely agree with us. Yeah, we also want a fair and equitable workplace. But the devil's in the details. There's a lot of problems with just saying that, but leaving too much up for interpretation. So we try to be specific. And then winnable, and again, it doesn't mean that it's easy. Winnable doesn't mean that you'll win it overnight. It just means that the decision makers that we're trying to influence actually have the power to change this. Sweet. So we were going to have a revenue example here, but I think I'm going to, just to save time, pass on that with Christine and Ann not going. So back to you, Pete.
Cool. So that's about I just want to take a second on this demand thing before we move on. It sounds like people are kind of grasping that. Does that make sense? And a lot of you said this, right? So do people feel pretty good about understanding why you take the time as a team to figure that out, right? I'll add one more with MBH, since we have a few MBH folks on here. So we've got a bunch of things we're working on with MBH management, and we really tried to get clear about one of them being about improving their hiring processes, speeding up. And we have asked them now a specific ask, but they did everything they could to say, we are totally going to speed up hiring. And when you ask, like, will you speed up hiring, which is a reasonable demand, but it is not specific enough, you know, they are more than happy to take you up on that and to give you something that you couldn't measure at all. So I think, so does everybody feel good about that kind of the demand portion? Cool. So the second thing then is about target, who has the power. This is sort of deceptively simple. It can sometimes be difficult. So I was asked, like, throw it up to you all. What, who might be a target of a campaign? Just like name like when you're doing a campaign, who might be the target? Walls might be a target. Yep. He was the target of our one of the targets we picked for bargaining last year, right? It was sort of our ultimate target at the end of bargaining. Who else? Who else might be a target?
Agency leadership.
Right. Yep. Anyone else?
Members,
Say more about that.
who has the power? The members have the power when we're unified.
Got it. I think that's a good. I think that's a good sentiment. I'll name that. I think specifically when we're talking about who has the power here, we mean the power to get to deliver what the members want. So we're building the power to change, and that's true. So it's just kind of a splitting words in a certain way. But we want to name a specific person that can give us what we need when we're talking about the targeted action.
MMB.
Yep. MMB, right. MMB might be one, HR might be one, right. So the reason it's important, though, to name this is that it actually is not, it's not inherent that we know this, right, correctly. Sometimes it might be that MMB has the power to give something to us, but they actually, but maybe they have the technical power to give it to us, but the actual problem is a lack of political will. And we might find that out, and who we really need to implement, what we really need to do is influence a commissioner level person in order to pressure HR to make that change, right? So that's important to know, because you might say, well, the person that can give us that power is HR, but you could spend all day long wailing on HR. And if HR goes to every meeting with the commission says, we're not doing that, you are not putting the pressure on the right person, right? Another example might be that, you might think, well, the commissioner has all the power all the time, but I'll tell you, there are a lot of commissioners that do not pay attention to what's going on in their agency particularly closely, and they leave running policy decisions up to an assistant or a deputy, and that person might have all the power. We have to do this with bargaining. So, for those who have been a part of bargaining, Nick and Christine and others, like, you will know that we sometimes are asking, well, does MMB give this one to us to ourselves? Can they decide, or are they, are their hands tied in this one by a resource question? Sometimes we try to split it up that way. We think if new resources are being spent, they might need to check in with a set of agency leaders. They might check in with the governor's team. But really, it can be complicated behind the scenes about who gets to make a call on something. So the idea is not that you know for sure, but rather that you are intentional about saying, this is our target, and we're crafting tactics to that. Does that make sense?
Sure. Well, you use the term influence. I mean, I think sometimes the power is like it's multi-layered. It's like a matrix, right? And
right.
Maybe there are allies who don't have direct decision making, but they have a lot of knowledge and insight into how to go about things.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's a very good point, and actually transitions into our next one really well, which is when we use this word target. And again, like, I think, we're purposely picking definitions to be narrow. When we talk about target, we talk about the person that we think is going to give us what we want, that's going to grant that thing. But to your point, David, power ecosystems are not always simple, and there are people who weigh in and have influence. And so then part of the question is, how do you pick strategies and tactics with data, with people, with influencing folks? How do you run strategies and tactics to influence that decision maker, that person who can give it to you. So I wanted to name that because I think what David just said is really helpful. Like if you know, well, we're working on a particular issue and there's actually a division director who has a lot of control over this particular thing, maybe the division director doesn't make the official policy call, but maybe that person who does relies heavily on that division director. And then the question of who your target becomes might switch, right? It might be both, or it might change from one to the other.
Well, and I think back to that Zoom meeting we had with the governor and Shoalwater, and there was lots of head nodding there. And perceived, for some reason, it seemed like it was a bit of a smokescreen.
Right. Yep, definitely. And smokescreen is definitely one of the things that they'll do to make it not clear who can get you what you want, right? And that'll definitely be a thing you try to push through. So let me ask people for tactics and strategy then. What might make a good tactic? What might be a good tactic to engage in if you're trying to convince a decision maker to do what you want? Any ideas?
We get a champion in management.
So recruit an ally and up in the chain somewhere. Yeah. Tim, why might that be good? Say more about it.
Well, they listen to that person more than the staff.
They might. And I'll say, even if they don't, it's sometimes helpful to have management. Sometimes management likes to think they're a hierarchy, and so they're all on the same page as long as one person at the top thinks that. But if they start realizing that other managers think differently, as we remember at MDH when people started weighing in to DHS that they wanted the language pilot, they looked at it very differently than us banging on them because they were not united. They realized, oh, we don't agree on this. Maybe our own managers want something different. Yep. Christine, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, what I always think of is what I start with is what motivates, and what would motivate a manager to make a change.
Yeah.
We learned in negotiations. I would have to admit I was surprised, although I haven't been in state all that long. I'm not surprised at budgetary things, financial things are impactful. It's also policy. Don't touch our rights to operate how we want. So how can we make this a win for them? What's their weak spot? Is it that we have staff turnover and that's making us unproductive? And that if by making this change, we have employees who are more committed and will stay? So find their weak spot and then try to think about and build, as Tim was saying, get somebody on your side saying, who is an ally in that concept and build it up.
Thank you. That makes sense. Ken, I just tried to change it so that you can unmute yourself. Thanks for the note.
Okay, and I think I'm there now.
Great.
So I wanted to, I've been trying to get in to make a comment. And I think this really has some consequence to the work that we're thinking about. And I think the best way to raise this point is I just got off a staff meeting earlier before this meeting, and our office manager identified the update that we all got. So Department of Transportation, all employees got an email last week identifying that we are going to start returning to having discussions about returning to the office after April 26th, I think was the date. So they were making an announcement that we are going to start focusing on some sort of return to workplace, but not before April 26th. So giving us a heads up. And my office director identified that we will discuss that and determine what kind of remote hybrid we want as individuals. And it sounds like that our department at Transportation, each unit is going to be determining for themselves what their return to work is going to look like. Are they going to be able to continue to work remotely 100%? Or do they want to do a hybrid et cetera. And it's going to be, it sounds like right now, based on the information we've been told, that it's going to be up to us in conversation with our supervisor. So that brings to mind to me, this is a pretty common strategy, that we're told one thing at one agency and another agency gets something different. In order to build some common knowledge about, number one, that there is an issue, we need to, as part of the campaign, create some education to our members to help them identify that this is a bigger problem. It may not appear to be a problem for you individually at the Department of Transportation right now, because the lip service we're getting is pretty good. So I'm afraid that if we don't include some sort of education, trying to educate our members, that they may be trying to split us.
Yeah.
And kind of weaken our power a little bit. So I think that really has to be an integral part of what we do, is educating our members that this is a really important aspect that will eventually affect them if it doesn't already. I think that's a really important piece.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken. That's helpful. I'll say that, I think there's two places where this, every layer of the campaign is an opportunity to build more unity on our members, with our members on any issue like this. And so I think, like we named in the last training that we were doing, that we recovered in the recap, if folks remember, we named that doing listening sessions to make sure people are united around what we're asking for and what the problem is important even before you start taking, employing strategies and tactics to pressure the boss. But I think, to Ken's point, there's also, you can actually use that continued member education as a strategy and a tactic that pressures the boss. So as another example, or like an example where we've sometimes done that, there was a story a little while back where, I can't remember what agency this is now, so if somebody's on here that remembers, where they were not updating position descriptions. And so they ended up organizing a position description updating party, where we literally, we're going to table and have everybody come and get trained on it visibly in front of the HR office, right? And just do it and work on it. And that lit a fire under them to get moving on doing it on their own side. And it was both educating our own members about that they were owed a position description and that they were going to do it, but it also puts, pressure on the management, showing that we will take action, that we are united around these things, and that we're not being, that we're not sort of waiting for them to act. So I think that that can be a really good, even member education tactics can also be public tactics actions on bosses that that help unite us. The other folks have thoughts on other things that might be good strategies and tactics? Anything about sort of a tactic, about a specific action you could take? Ideas, things you've done, things you've seen, maybe not even at MAPE, maybe not even in labor.
So this is Ken. I'm going to jump in again. So one of the things, so we did listening sessions prior to the contract rally to make sure that people understood the parameters of what we were against. But in addition, I sent out email blasts, and my email blasts, there were two of them for sure. Again, trying to educate people in a way that wasn't very accusatory, but just laid out some facts. And really, the second one was to draw the connection between the facts of what was happening and how that affected them, particularly individually. So make that connection for them. We would hope that they would be able to make that connection themselves, but quite frankly, I wasn't going to leave that to chance. So I made the connection of how this really affected them individually. And those email blasts were really powerful to get people to think about coming. And I think that's how we ended up being able to get a large contingency of our local members to be at that rally. Without that, I don't think we would have had that so much. So I think that's another piece, that written connection in addition to the listening sessions.
Yep. Thanks, Ken. I've also got in the chat here, attend town hall meetings for your state senator, House person, ask relevant recruits. So you could imagine bringing a message to senators. I think that's good. I'll just name back to Ken's example, just naming the rally that we did last year. So that rally, there was a lot of discussion and debate about whether we would do that with the negotiations team and with leadership of the union. And you know, the strategy there, that tactic was about, was deciding that you know, Walls was really trying to hide behind a pro union, you know, a pro-union message, while letting his subordinates be anti-union in their proposals and their actions. And we called that out directly, publicly, deciding that we gave them, if you all remember, we gave them multiple chances to sort of settle those things behind the scenes. And you know, so we really took that opportunity to take that tactic to the public. And I think that's an example of a tactic where we decided we needed to be public and not just internal. Cool. So tactics and strategies. These are kind of some of the things that we think about, and I think you guys have named them. It should address the target and the target's interests and political vulnerabilities. So sometimes that might be an HR person's need to, to get position descriptions done, or to have, that case. It might be a governor's need to get reelected. It might be a commissioner's desire to have a particular story about their agency and not have one that's different, right? When we were working at MDH around, we had people come to us that were sanitarians who were doing enforcement of the masking order during the first lockdown, and they had not been given proper PPE. And we did a petition, but we also brought it to management very clearly that if we weren't going to get an answer quickly on this internally, we could go external, which would have looked very bad for MDH. That their sanitarians were not getting what they needed to do that work. And so they needed to be on message and in line with their own guidance around masking. And so they did. They got the PPE quickly. It should unite our members and give them energy. So you want, this is part of what Ken was saying about education, but it's also about purposely picking tactics that people are ready for, right? So there's a reason that SPFE first did a petition that said, I will strike, I will vote for a strike if need to, and then they do a strike vote before they strike, because they're trying to determine, are they united around that tactic? Strikes are the biggest tactic a union can take on, right? And the question is, what are we going to be, are we going to be united around that? And then the last one is creativity is key. So part of it is sometimes we get stuck in there's only a hierarchy of people that we can talk to, and it's about talking to people, but it's also about creativity, right? So when we were trying to get paid parental leave through the legislature, and we were having trouble there, we brought parents with babies to the legislature, and we cornered the legislators holding little kids to show that this was our families that you're not allowing us to spend time with, right? So there is creativity, space for creativity as well. Yeah, go ahead, David, add one. You said you were gonna add a fourth, offer a fourth thing? Oh, can't unmute, huh? Let me try to unmute you here.
Thanks. I think having a real acute awareness of sort of the internal and external communication channels, and where there's a high likelihood of uptake of so say creativity, you have the most creative thing, but if it doesn't get out in front of the right audiences, it may not have a lot of impact. So I would want to be thinking about sort of our messaging and communications strategies and tactics. Where do we get that out there in front of people?
Yeah, right. So a great strategy, a great tactic is useless if the right people don't see it. Is that kind of your point, if I'm understanding
Correct.
correctly? Right. Yeah, that's totally right. And so that probably means about where you do an action, how you do an action. We had this discussion with I don't know if those on negotiations remember this last time, but we were going to do this Twitter action as a part of the thing, and we realized after finding the MMB handle that no one had checked that handle in like a year and a half, and we realized we don't think anybody's actually paying attention to that. So if we at that Twitter handle, nobody's going to see it. So we had to quick switch to which place we were doing it, because we needed to actually have it be seen. So I think, like, no matter what your tactic is, that's right, you've got to consider who's actually seeing it. And sometimes we do that by being just purposely visible. Sometimes and sometimes we're really purposely quiet about it, and maybe leak something out to the right place. So I think those things can be really really important consideration. Any other thoughts on strategy and tactics about ideas? So I mean, I just want to keep this in mind that you start brainstorming those once you know what you're trying to get. You don't have to do them all at once. And we'll talk more about what order to do them in, but you want to be thinking about what actions you can take that are strategic, that impact your decision maker. Any other questions, thoughts on that one before we move on? Cool. To you, Nick.
Right. Like Pete said, we're going to talk about what order they go in, and this is where we talk about that now. So escalation refers to the degrees or intensity of the actions or tactics we use to put pressure on management. So we normally start small with small tactics and then ramp up as we go while giving management the opportunity to do the right thing along the way. So at any point, so that's the subheading here, action, we act, and then wait for a reaction from management. And if they accept our demand at that point, the campaign's done, we're good to go. But assuming that they normally don't at the first stage. So then we have to go back to the drawing board, plan, and do another action. So that's kind of the model of the escalation strategy. You start small, you assess, potentially reassess, and then keep going forward with something bigger. So that the escalatory theory there is important for two reasons. One, it keeps pressure on management and it keeps them off guard, but also it helps the union understand what its own capacity is, like Pete just mentioned with the SPFE example. So for example, in the contract campaign last year, which we just talked about, we started with some Twitter actions, which Pete mentioned, and then we generated a petition, and then we did a rally at the end. And that was by design to build pressure, both for management and for our own team, getting them ready to act and making sure that we had the understand what our own capabilities and capacity is. So like we just talked about, what's the highest form of escalation for a contract campaign? Well, that's a strike. Of course, nobody wants to go on strike, so unions will typically begin with smaller escalations first and then build towards a strike. It puts pressure both on management, but it also allows the union team to really understand what its capabilities are. So if we can't get people to sign a petition, we're likely to not be able to get people to commit to a strike. Right? Does that make sense? So the idea again for management is just you're slowly building pressure over time while keeping the pressure coming, but giving management an off ramp at every stage of the game. And then getting to a win. So essentially this is the model. You keep this up until you get a win, ideally, but these plans aren't clear and easy. There's gonna be times, like I said, you have to go back to the drawing board. There may be tactics that we employ that don't have the intended consequences. There may be a win that we get along the way that we weren't expecting, or we get it somewhere where we weren't really expecting to get it. So all this stuff is kind of fluid. I just want to end on one note when thinking about getting a win, is it's okay to lose. It's okay to lose along the way. And I can best illustrate this with an example. I remember a couple of years ago, I spent a lot of time on the student loan debt campaign of the Department of Revenue. And we had an awesome action. We had 150 people with the commissioner, pressuring the commissioner to adopt a student loan debt program at Revenue. And the commissioner was really energized about it. She seemed real favorable. We thought we were going to get it. We took it to supplemental bargaining, and that's where we lost. HR just said no, and we couldn't count on the commissioner, which we thought we had her. We couldn't count on the commissioner to actually tell HR to agree with us. So at that stage of the game, we lost it. And I was feeling kind of down. And I talked to my boss at the time, and we were just getting over the paid parental leave win, which was a huge win for me. And she said to me, like, Nick, we lost paid parental leave 5 times before we won it. And that always stuck with me, right? Because we lost paid parental leave 5 times before we won it. So you're going to suffer a lot of losses along the way, and that's totally okay. Just keep fighting, keep at it. Any no along the way is, most of them are expected. It does not mean the campaign is over. It just means you got to keep fighting and maybe adjusting your tactics.
Hey, Nick.
Any questions on that piece? Yeah.
Yeah.
Ken.
So, another example of that same thing, a loss is actually part of the process, is when you think of legislative work, and how many times are we involved with pushing legislation forward and working really hard to make sure we testify and we bring all the right details to try to move this legislation forward, and then it fails. And that's almost the process that we have to experience, because each year that legislation gets reintroduced, it gets bigger and more powerful each time. And sometimes that's just the legislative process. We expect to lose initially for some of the bigger things, but we keep at it, and each time it gets a little stronger and a little stronger.
Absolutely, Ken. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, certainly nothing legislative or otherwise normally gets done in the first go at it. That's
Right.
definitely important. Thanks for sharing that. So we had a couple of comments. Yeah, absolutely. Losses allow for reconfiguring the demand, the tactics, pretty much everything along the way in the plan. Any other thoughts or comments on this piece? If not, I think it's back to Pete to wrap us up.
That's it. Yeah. So the question I have for you guys for the last few minutes here is, what's energizing about this? What's terrifying? So I know that this is now 2 hours of training, although what it makes you realize about how many layers there are in this thing when 2 hours seems like it, is too fast for each of the chunks. But I'm curious, after seeing these pieces of it, what energizes you about it? What's maybe terrifying about it when you think about running a campaign, being a part of a campaign? I'm going to stop sharing so we can just see each other while we chat. Any reactions to all of it? No, why can people not unmute? Weird.
Hi, it's Christine. I guess what I think about it on both sides. First, that it is a series of steps. There is a bit of a recipe to this. It is theoretically doable. Hearing the words reminding that I've heard, yes, for union organizing and also getting legislation passed, it takes a while. It doesn't happen immediately. As much as we want it, it doesn't happen. And so, but I guess the uncertainty of it is kind of the hard part, is we worked so darn hard on it and it doesn't make progress. So you have to, I think, pull back, recover, and try again.
Right.
Thank you for your guidance.
Thanks, Christine. Others have thoughts, reactions?
If you're having trouble unmuting, you can just raise your hand and we'll try to unmute you as host.
So this is Ken. I'll share what I hear most from members that I have conversations about to this question. What are the goods and the bads about joining in on a labor campaign or a movement? And I hear from members that they're fearful for reprisal, for being involved, or for being known that they're involved and out front. So there's an undercurrent of worrying about getting tagged that they're a union person. They're stirring up the pot. And on the other hand, I hear from people that it's totally energizing when they realize that they can work and build synergy with other people instead of just working by themselves for something that's really important related to a work condition. And, I think the thing I also hear from people is we as state workers have it pretty decent in terms of we get benefits, pension, state seniority, that kind of stuff. But and we don't have it as bad as some other people may have it. And I think that's a reflection of, at DOT, knock on wood, we don't have very many grievances. So people have this kind of false sense that everything is good and they don't want to upset the apple cart. So I think that just makes it a stronger point that we really have to make that connection of why this is really a critically important need for them to be involved.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken. I'm just going to name that in the chat. Kelly wrote, it's great to know the steps, but it feels terrifying that it can take so long if you are working on an issue that might have a moment, that it have its moment pass, like COVID work recognition. Yeah, I think that that's right. And both these things are really good points to make. I think, Kelly, to your point, Nick's point on sort of short-term and long-term, I think that that's part of what's struggle about this, because you got moments in time when things feel hot, and if you're not ready for, to like make a good push there, like for instance, because everybody's exhausted because of doing COVID work for the last 2 years, then you might feel like you've missed it, and then you have to say, well, what can we win quickly that's small, and then what can we build towards to rectify the imbalances of the things more long-term. And it might take going back to the drawing board and saying, what's next year, right? What's, like, for instance, maybe we end up having a really strong contract battle about things we know were revealed to be broken that aren't exactly recognition, but actually are helping us say this can't happen again, or, that kind of thing. And so it's right that it can be hard. Nothing is guaranteed. This is a process that allows an opportunity to rectify a power imbalance, but it doesn't guarantee it, right? And so I think that's true. And then I'll just add, for the courage, the sort of the retaliation piece of it that Ken mentioned. I think all of this stuff always required courage. Like, that's part of the deal. And it can be a little scary, and that's true. I also think that if you are sitting there thinking, why am I so out there alone and am the target of any response, that also might be a red flag that you need to have a bigger team that needs to act collectively and have a lot of people taking roles and outface, because what really actually gives us safety in this work is being a mass, right? So the more people that are involved, the harder it is to pick off one person that they can retaliate against and say, that's the person who's a rabble rouser intention. They'll always try to do that. That is true. And so instead of expecting no retaliation, hoping it doesn't happen, we should expect pushback and prepare for it. But we should also do that collectively and not individually, because the more individually you do it, the more it's true that you're in danger. But the more you do it collectively, with dozens of people as leaders, with hundreds of people or thousands of people, the more safety you have, right? There's a reason we don't say we're going on strike, one person every day for the next 15,000 days, right? We do it together. Yeah. Cool. Any other final thoughts from anybody on campaigning? Thanks for being part of this. Appreciate everybody's thoughts and energy on this. And if you have thoughts or questions about this training, reach out to us as we're going forward. And I'm sure you'll start to see more opportunities for campaigns to join soon. So